was in a hotel, and the food was awful.
Really?
It was too rich. There was too much of it. You know what? Could you put those in a bowl? The bowls are over there. Thank you, because people need to measure them. That's great. Yeah, so I went to the store and used the barks and ground seeds and all this stuff. It's just amazing. He wants to stimulate the relationship between my liver and kidneys, he said. And I also have a little lower back pain from being my age, over 40, and working out. And this tonic is for lower back pain. It's just amazing.
Now, is he still in town, or is he?
No, he's left. He's left. But most of these Chinese herb stores have herbalists on duty.
I used to see them when I was younger for acne, and I had to drink all these stuff. There's always lots of tonics that we boil at home and drink.
Yeah, and I bought a special pot.
Oh, did
It's
you?
like a ceramic pot because you can't use metal. And what
Oh, yeah, we steam it inside a pot. That's how we make the medicinal stuff.
Yeah.
We put the ceramic pot in a metal pot with water in it, and we cook the pot in the pot.
Oh, well, what he told me to do today was I had to season the pot. So I had to add a cup of rice and fill it with water 3/4 of the way, bring it to a boil, and leave it sit. Yeah, that's basil. It's a root. It's okay on the table.
It's okay?
Yeah, so I thought, okay, I can do this, you know.
The book you have on the counter right there?
Yes, it took me a year to write, and it's based on my recipes that I've been teaching at the Big Carrot. I've been teaching beginner and advanced vegetarian cooking classes here for 10 years. And what I've had to do is I've had to learn to listen all over again to what people's needs are. Because my background is that of a chef, and when you're with other chefs, other people in the food industry, you tend to want to discuss food trends, food issues, and someone who has to come home at the end of the day and has 20 minutes to make a nutritious, delicious meal isn't as concerned about the 7 kinds of heirloom tomatoes you can get and the best way to seed them. So I listen to people. In my book, for instance, I have preparation time and cooking time split up to give people the exact amount of time so they'll know I have this much time to cook, what can I make tonight? And I tried to make the book very user-friendly. For instance, I've got some tofu here. You go to a health food store, there's 7, 8 kinds of tofu to buy. How do you know which kind to buy? Firm, extra firm, soft. And why is the extra firm twice as expensive as a regular piece of tofu? When should I change the water? So what I've tried to do is give consumers a lot of information so they can make intelligent decisions as well as prepare the meals. I hired a recipe tester, a woman who worked at Canadian Living, because I felt that she had her pulse on what the average Canadian would eat, and I don't mean that in a condescending way. She said to me, "Nettie, I know you teach in a health food store, but you've got to walk through some supermarkets." And she took me to 3 different supermarkets, see what's on the shelves, see what people can buy. You might recommend soy milk for that poppy seed cake recipe, but most people will use 2% or skim. And she's right. So what we've tried to do in the book is give people options. If you want to be dairy-free, you don't have to use any dairy. I have substitutions for things like cheese. You can use good-tasting nutritional yeast, breadcrumbs, other ingredients. And if you decide you do want to use dairy and buy all your ingredients in a supermarket, you can do that as well.
Now, you said your background is a chef. Now, did you learn to be a chef with meat, or have you always been a vegetarian chef?
Well, I've been a vegetarian since '74, and I learned to cook. My first experience with knives happened on a kibbutz in Israel. And I was an apprentice to the vegetarian chef. And I stayed there about a year, gained 25 pounds, and then went further east, India, Thailand. And when I eventually, 2 years later, came back to Canada, I decided I wanted to remain vegetarian, did some higher education, and started teaching cooking classes, opened my own deli in a health food store, and worked at various establishments around the city. And then I got a job at King Ranch as a vegetarian chef. And I also had my own food company where I made a line of vegetarian frozen dinners. I had 8 different dinners, and they were very, very popular.
What are the benefits of switching to being vegetarian for you?
Well, for me, I became a vegetarian for ethical reasons, but I'm finding now more and more people want the option of a vegetarian diet. Someone will say to me, you know, I'm a damn good cook. I know how to cook a chicken, I know how to cook a roast, but I'm tired of chilies, I'm tired of lasagnas. What other ingredients can I use? I hear about these wonderful grains, things like quinoa, spelt. How can I cook with them in an intelligent, tasty way? And so more and more people that come to take the class are interested in health. Or they may know someone who's not well, or they may want to be part of a support group. And so they approach the classes with an open mind and at the same time wanting to increase their recipe repertoire. Other people are vegetarian, maybe for ethical reasons or other reasons. And basically, it's such a personal thing. It's very, very hard to be consistent.
Well, I'm not a vegetarian, and the reason why is because I think that meat has so much flavor. There's no misconception there that because it's vegetables, it won't have as much deep flavor as meat.
Well, a vegetarian diet is more than just vegetables. It involves soy foods, things like tempeh, tofu, misos, grains and beans. And a lot of grains can be used in pie crusts also, things like sea vegetables. And there are a lot of vegetables people are very unfamiliar with, things like celeriac and daikon. So a vegetarian diet is varied, and if you're at all experimental, don't mind traveling, you can go to an Asian supermarket or you can go to a health food store and find terrific ingredients that you can use that will absorb flavors, will lend flavors, lend aromas. And I think if people feel that meat is an integral part of their diet and they enjoy eating it, what they might want to do is look at how much of it am I eating, what's healthy. 3 to 5 ounces, that's fine. 14, it's not. And so what people have to do is they have to lower the amount of meat they're eating, not eat it as many times a day as they're eating it.
Now why is meat not so good for you if you're eating like 14 ounces? What can be the problems with that?
What do you think some of the problems are?
Well, I think using
too much protein, for one, too much fat. If you look at many of the low-fat cookbooks that include meat or include fish or include chicken, it's the lower fat cuts, and the amounts are drastically reduced because of the amount of fat that's found in meat.
What kind of people take your vegetarian?
Oh, a tremendous variance in the sorts of people. Do you mind, can I ask you just to get me one of those two of those dish towels? I've been getting a lot of divorced fathers.
Really?
Men who have to look after their kids for the first time in their lives. And then I get a lot of teenagers who want to be vegetarian but don't know how to cook. And then I get other people who have had health scares and they're saying to themselves, you know, I'm going to do something about this. Or I get a lot of professional people in social work field, nurses, doctors, who are treating people who aren't well. And at the end of the day, they're looking at their life and they're saying to themselves, I'm talking to these people about their cholesterol levels, the amount of fat. Look at my diet. So I think people are becoming more aware. You can't pick up a magazine or newspaper without there being an article related to health. If it's not specifically about a vegetarian diet, it's something that's related to the diet. When you look at what people eat, especially athletes, you'll find that they're very, very healthy foods that they eat. And the portions and the amount vary depending upon the sport. But I think more and more people are saying to themselves, I have to look past tomorrow. And of course, when you have your holidays, you have people that might eat the traditional foods that they like to eat. But very, very often, people are saying, I can't eat the foods I used to eat. It's the same thing with smoking and drinking. There's less and less excess going on. And I have some tofu here, and I'm going to press it. I'm slicing it in 3, and we're going to be using it in the class tonight. The recipe calls for pressed tofu, and I find when I press it ahead of time, I'm saving some time. And if you read a recipe correctly and you're organized in the kitchen, what happens is you can prepare the rest of the recipe, and then your tofu's been pressed the required amount of time.
Now, when you're cooking vegetarian, does it take less time, you believe, than to cook?
Well, in my book, the first section is called Setting Up a Natural Foods Kitchen. You have to have the proper ingredients, and they have to be ready to cook with. That's very important also.
What are the main ingredients in a vegetarian kitchen?
In a vegetarian kitchen? Well, first of all, I start with the pots and pans. You need sharp knives, good quality pots and pans. When I say good quality, you know, a good combo, stainless steel, it's with copper, and then you have to have things like good wooden spoons and whisks. And then you have to look at your diet. If you've never eaten beans before, don't start with kidney beans. Start with split peas, start with lentils. And if you've never used sea vegetables, use the ones that require a small amount of cooking as opposed to a long amount. Start with something like arame as opposed to hijiki. If you're going to look at soy foods like tofu and you want to cook with it, try making a tofu mayonnaise with it as opposed to a tofu stroganoff. And if you're looking at grains and you've never had brown rice, try a basmati, one that requires maybe 15 minutes to cook rather than 45. And if you're looking at vegetables, you know, I really recommend the use of organically grown food. And one of the nice things about the carrot is whenever there's organic produce or beans or grains, I'm allowed to use it in the course. But because it's so expensive, it's not affordable. So you say, well, if more people bought organically grown food, it wouldn't be so expensive. But because it's so expensive, you can't buy it. And a lot of the food, especially in the middle of winter, it comes from California, so it's transportation costs. So I tell people, start with garlic. Some organic garlic, some organic onions, some organic carrots. Those are affordable. What you have to do is try your best, and what's best for you may not be best for me, but you know you're trying your best. I think it's really hard when people set themselves up as examples and find they can't follow through. It's hard being consistent all the time.
Now, you said you gained 25 pounds.
I did.
Now, do you find that switching to a vegetarian diet, people often lose weight, or does it not vary?
Well, I worked with Ann Lindsay at King Ranch, which was a health spa. And I worked with her computer. And I was amazed at how much fat there was in a vegetarian diet. And that's due to a lot of dairy and a lot of oil, a lot of marinades. So you really need to, and then again, there are different kinds of fat also. So I'm very conscious of saturated fat as opposed to other kinds of fat. And when I was living in Israel, we had great recipes. We would add chocolate and sugar to cheese. We would also, you know, fry eggplant in a bathtub of oil. So I was eating highly caloric foods, highly caloric. But food doesn't have to be high fat.
To taste good.
Mm-hmm. But you have to, once again, you have to be open-minded about tastes. If you've never used red wine vinegar, you might find it too acidic. So, you know, you start with a rice wine vinegar. You have to learn a bit more about the foods that you eat, understand their differences, understand their cooking techniques, understand the properties. For instance, a lot of the oils require refrigeration after they've been opened because they've just been sealed with nitrogen. So you need to read your labels, especially in a health food store.
Can you talk about some of your favorite recipes in your book?
Oh, for sure. Do you want me to open the page? Okay,
If you continue, if we can get a question line going in regards to her book.
Okay, and I just remembered I have to get some more canola oil.
That's okay.
You want to do that now?
Do you want to
Or?
do that?
No, I can get it in a few minutes.
Oh, okay.
'Cause we won't. Okay, some of my favorite recipes, 36. Okay, I've got some here. Okay, I have a great dip in the book. It's called Tofu Cream Cheese Spread with Garlic and Herbs. So when I demo around the city, I usually prepare this dip with some veggies and some chips. And for a lot of people who've never tasted tofu, they'll go, uh-oh, tofu's in this. And the cream cheese will disguise or add to the flavor of the tofu itself. And I think that's important when people have never tasted an ingredient. It's important that it's tasty. So this is a really good dip for people who have never tasted tofu before. You can put it in a little pita with some sprouts, some grated carrots. It makes a lovely sandwich spread also. So if you want to cut back on the amount of cream cheese in your diet, try pureeing some tofu with it. Also, I have a marinated tofu salad. People actually think the pieces of marinated tofu are goat's cheese or feta cheese. And that's because when the tofu is pressed, you remove its excess water and then you marinate it. and then you steam, grate your other ingredients, combine it all together, and this makes a terrific salad. You know, you can add a couple olives, serve it against some spinach or lettuce leaves, and it could be a meal in itself. Stuff it in a pita. It's a big favorite around our house. I also have a lot of burger recipes. This one in particular, buckwheat potato pancakes. So it's dairy-free, it's vegan, and we cook our buckwheat groats in some water, and then we steam our potatoes, combine them together with some garlic, some onions, and some almond nut butter for flavor. And the texture is wonderful. They hold together well, whether you bake them against parchment paper in the oven or dip them in some egg white and some good tasting nutritional yeast and just fry them on top of the stove. You can also make little kebabs with them like you would in a pita. And the texture really lends itself well for many, many kinds of burgers that you'd want to prepare. And I also have a potluck chili. And in this particular recipe, you can cook the beans from scratch, or you can use beans in a can. There's no reason that you can't buy organic, delicious beans in a can. And people are busy. People often don't have the time to make a chili from scratch. And this also has cashew nuts and sun-dried tomatoes, so it's not your run-of-the-mill chili that might just have some beans and a few vegetables in it.
Another question, with these recipes, because they're all vegetable based, do they last longer than?
Well, that's a good question, because at the end of my recipe I also have staying time, so it lets you know how long this recipe can stay in the fridge. Usually a chili would be good for 3 or 4 days, and you can also further puree it if you want it to be more soup than chili based. And I really think that more and more people are looking for meals that they can eat more than once or even more than twice. And for instance, here's a recipe for tofu mayonnaise, with or without yogurt. Now, everyone has mayonnaise. This recipe stays for a week in the house. It uses a really good quality mustard combined with the vinegar. So it's got that slight acid taste, that grainy taste from good quality mustard. And it's great. It's even used with things like tuna fish. Or you could use it in your potato salad. And if you're traveling somewhere and you don't have a lot of refrigeration, you can leave the yogurt out, just do a straight tofu mayonnaise and not have to worry about it spoiling. And what would a cookbook be without a recipe for carrot cake? And I even have a recipe for carrot cake icing. It's a cream cheese icing. And you don't need a lot. You just need a bit. And once again, you can cut back on the cream cheese by using some tofu also. I have a coconut cake, some peanut butter cookies, ginger snaps. All of these recipes are basic recipes, but they're healthier recipes. I use whole wheat flour. I cut back on the amount of dairy, and they're delicious. As I said before, I had a recipe tester from Canadian Living Magazine, and she tested them all, and they're extremely delicious.
And I noticed there's not as much oil in these recipes than most. Like, for example, a lot of cookies use a lot of butter, and carrot cakes, for example, use like almost a cup of oil. Do you find that most recipes don't need as much oil as they put it down?
That's right, they don't. And you can use other liquids to compensate.
Applesauce?
Applesauce. Or you can use prune puree, or you can use banana puree. A lot of it depends on the ingredients that you're using. I like using maple syrup a lot too.
So was it easy getting published with your cookbook?
Well, what happened was I approached Second Story Press. They published the Big Carrot Cookbook, and I had an outline of the book that I wanted to write. And they asked me to flesh it out. Can you give us an intro to a chapter and half a dozen recipes? We'd like to look at it more closely. I did that, and they said, fine, we think that you could write a very good book. You've been teaching for 10 years. You've been a chef for 15. And then we decided on the number of recipes that would be in the book. And we had to decide on the basic format and style as well. So from there, it took me a year to write the book. And I did the book section by section, and I would test a recipe, and then my recipe tester would test a recipe. So I would shop for all the ingredients, take them over to her home. She would prepare something, and then we'd taste it. And we'd taste it against what I had prepared, and we would taste it. We had different criteria. What's the texture? How well does it hold together? Is it too sweet? Does it need more acid? Would someone make this recipe? We looked at the level of difficulty. And taking all those things into account, we would then decide whether the recipe passed, whether yes, it will be in the book, no, it doesn't suit our outline, it doesn't suit what our mandate is.
Did you find it hard putting together a cookbook? Because
I
know as
did.
many cooks, you just throw things in and you don't really think about how much you're putting in because you just know.
Well, my recipe tester, her name's Kate Gamal. Kate would say to me, Nettie, what's a pinch? Because I would say, oh, just have a pinch of that. Because so many of these recipes I've been cooking for so long, and you can't tell people a pinch. You need a measurement, whether it's 1/8 of a teaspoon, 1/2 a teaspoon. You can't say a pinch. And a lot of times, that's right, and a lot of times I would never measure something that I would add. So she would say, that's a really good taste. And I'd say, oh no, I forgot to measure the vanilla, or I didn't measure the salt. And so I think it's important when writing a cookbook to be a scientist. You have to write down everything. And you also can't assume people understand what you're saying. So you also need a very good editor. Ria Trebegoff edited my book, and she was very, very precise. And she would phone me up and she would say, well, Nettie, sometimes you use the word stir and sometimes you use the word saute. What's the difference? Or how can you be more consistent to use the same term? Or there are, you know, for instance, cilantro is also known as coriander leaves. So it's like you have to use the same ingredient name for the ingredient throughout the book. And she would be able to point these things out.
Like for example, this is Chinese parsley, right?
Yes. It's
But,
also,
some people call it coriander
yes,
and parsley.
that's right.
So, because there's a distinct flavor to the Chinese.
That's right. So what you have to do is decide what term am I going to use and be consistent about it. And that's what a good editor does, you know, a good recipe tester does. They keep you on track because you're the creative input behind it. And sometimes, you know, when you're trying to be creative and you're trying to be innovative, you need to just do that, and you need other people to look after the technical side that's involved.
A question to go back. I love to cook, and I think that I have the flair to cook. Do you think everyone does? Do you think you can actually really learn to be a good cook? Or you're basically born with the flair of knowing how to put things together?
I think it all depends on what motivates you. I'm noticing more and more men at my cooking class because they've decided I need to look after myself. Women traditionally look after themselves, or as they grow up, they've got to cook for others, depending where you are in the family. And so I really think that if you set your mind to it, you can cook. Not only is this something that I can do, but it tastes good, and I'm nourishing myself. So I think anyone can cook, and I'm delighted to see more and more children in the kitchen.
So how many books have you published or out in the stores right now?
There are 5,000 books that have been published for the first printing, and they're available everywhere. The cookbook store, Chapters, W.H. Smith, health food stores. I've been doing a lot of signings. I was just at the cookbook store at Yorkville and Yonge, and they asked me to sign 2 cases, 48 books, because they're guaranteed that they're going to sell. So I think that's a very good indicator that the book is doing well.
Are there a lot of vegetarian cookbooks out there, or?
There are, but there aren't a lot of Canadian vegetarian cookbooks. And I really think mine is unique because it is modeled on recipes that I teach in the cooking course at the Big Carrot. And these recipes evolved because of what the students' needs were. And I like to think that I really do have my finger on the pulse of what people want to cook, what people are interested in learning. The recipes are easy. I don't use a lot of complicated cooking techniques.
So tell me, you don't have to answer. Can you make a living off of writing your own cookbook? And
No. You have to do a number of things. Like for instance, I teach my cooking classes here. I write the book. I try and write as many articles and teach classes in as many places as I can.
how frequently do you give?
I'm here 2 nights a week. The classes are 5 weeks long, and they're hands-on. They're from 7:30 to 10. For a lot of people, they've never experienced the texture of tofu or tempeh, and it's very important for people to see how long it takes to actually cook a food rather than just read about it. And food is also an investment. People might think, my gosh, this meal is going to cost me X amount of dollars. In the cooking class, they don't have to take the responsibility for that because it's part of the cost of the course. And they'll say, you know, that was a really good ingredient. I always like it when people can have at least 3 uses for an ingredient. I mean, how many times have you bought an ingredient you've had 1 use for and it just sits on your shelf? So whether it's tofu or tempeh, whether it's a vegetable you've never used before or a root, I try and give you lots of ways to use it, and at the same time give you information so you can make an intelligent purchase. A store like the Big Carrot sells things pre-packaged and loose leaf, so you may not have to spend a lot of money to buy a lot of that particular ingredient. Maybe you can just get half a cup, which is might be just what you need.
Do you think vegetarians have a bad rep or anything? Because when people ask you if you're vegetarian, is there some type of like, oh, she's a vegetarian?
Well, you know, people get incredibly defensive about eating meat. I think whether you choose or not choose to eat meat is a personal decision, and I think it has a lot of impact, whether it's on the environment, the people you socialize with. But I really think you need to be moderate, and moderate in your views and moderate in your actions, because I think change is gradual if it's going to take effect. And you know, now that I'm in my 40s, I see that more than maybe when I was in my 20s. So I see a lot of activists in all the different animal rights movements, and I can understand the way they feel. Part of it has to do with their youth and the strong conviction behind their beliefs. For me, being a vegetarian became my livelihood, the way I earn my living through teaching my cooking classes. I had a catering company, then I had a deli, then I had a food business, and then I started teaching again, and now I've written a cookbook. I've also done a CD-ROM, and so more and more of the way I earn my livelihood is becoming diversified. If I got a phone call tomorrow to write another book, or if I was asked to do some articles, I would accept that because it would be a way to earn some money and it would still be in the same field. Being a vegetarian chef is a bit of an oxymoron because there are very few restaurants that would employ chefs on a full-time basis just to cook vegetarian foods. Many of the vegetarian restaurants in the city are often family-owned or cooperatively owned, so it's quite difficult to earn a living in the vegetarian field without being a jack of many trades and being able to say, yes, I can do that, whether it's going to a trade show and demoing a product, or whether it's going to an event and catering the lunch. You have to be willing to do many things in order to earn a living in this field.
Do you like your job?
What day of the week is it? Liking my job. It depends. A lot of it, it's a combination of things. A lot of times, you know, being in the vegetarian field, people look at you. They want to know, what's your skin like? What are your nails like? Do you look healthy? Because if you look healthy, then maybe I'll listen to you. Maybe I'll eat the foods that you recommend. But a lot of it, I think, is a combination of effects. I think love is important. The fact that I'm married to someone I respect and love, that there's a bit of synchronicity, that there's some balance to it all.
We can always take another room.
So I brought in, there's the different cookbooks. Some of them are mine, some of them aren't. Here's a high flavor, low fat. And I'm just going to show them this one for a second. And this is a high flavor vegetarian low fat cookbook. And here's the Vegetarian Times cookbook. So there are all kinds of great cookbooks to have a look at. Are you a fan of eating well? Oh, yeah. Low fat May?
No, I got it right underneath.
So this one has beautiful pictures.
Pizza stuffing.
How did I know that? Oh, good. Yeah, I'm always looking for places to visit. Okay. It's really easy, and I've already pressed the tofu. So you can just start to work on it. I'm going to show you when we go in the kitchen.
We don't go together. We should have coordinated.
Oh, so can you tell me why you decided to take this cooking class?
Well, actually, I'm not interested in really becoming a vegetarian, but I wanted to know what you can do with vegetables to make life more interesting, so that you can at least do away with meat part of the week or part of the time. But I'm not sure, although Nellie has really motivated me about becoming a total vegetarian.
How have you found the recipes that you've been learning?
Wonderful. Really enjoyed making them and eating them.
What is it about them that make them wonderful?
Well, I think using ingredients in a different way, and certainly being introduced to a lot of new vegetables and products that tempeh and miso and all kinds of things that I really had never used before or tried, and it's quite exciting actually.
How about you? How have you found the recipes that you've been learning?
Well, very good. I have teenagers at home, and I, share them with my family.
And what has been the reaction of trying these new recipes?
Well, they find them different, because they're still, my husband likes meat and potatoes, and but we will try a lot of these recipes.
So why did
I
you
will.
decide to take a vegetarian cooking course other
Well,
than regular?
I have a different reason from Harriet. I have a daughter who thinks she's vegetarian, but she's not going about it the proper way. So I just want some, actually protein ideas from this course, so she can get proper nutrition.
Has it been easy to learn, and how do you find vegetarian cooking?
Oh, it's easy. 'Cause